Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Our guest this week is an old hand and completely aware that I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. So, for those who are new, that requires a word of warning that this is not a safe space for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, but he's not going to be able to introduce our sponsors at the moment because technology has interfered with his joining us early. He should be here fairly soon after he restarts his whole computer. But in the meantime, we have our friend Mark Tabladillo on. This is broadcast number 89, and we're talking about a word about Ratio Christi. Did I say that right?
Yes, that's great. Ratio Christi.
Okay.
So happy to be talking about that today.
And what is Ratio Christi for those who have no clue?
Sure. So I'm going to read just our standard blurb from our webpage. So Ratio Christi, those words are Latin, and they mean the reason of Christ. And it's a global movement that equips university students and faculty to give historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for following Jesus Christ. That's a short definition.
That's a short definition. Okay.
Yep.
So it's not rational Christi. It's the reason, right?
The reason of Christ.
The reason of Christ. Okay.
Right.
And so, when Jesus said in the what is the greatest commandment, he said to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. You're kind of pursuing that aspect of the faith.
We are doing that, and there are a number of people involved. We'll talk about some of that today. And the goal here is to bring faith and reason to establish an intellectual voice of Christ in the university, and that's already happening now through so many apologetics clubs.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. When Joy and I first started out 3 decades ago now, you believe that? 3 decades ago. There were some who were doing apologetics. You had Dr. Walter Martin, obviously, and Norm Geisler, and that was going on in some of the universities, seminaries and that sort of thing, but not to a high degree. It seemed like no one really cared all that much about a defense of the faith. And recently, I would say, to me, it looks like in the last 5 years or so, they're just springing up everywhere. You have apologetics clubs and apologetics organizations and apologetics websites, and they're sort of coming out everywhere, unfortunately disconnected from one another. So many of them don't even realize, like Midwest Christian Outreach and Watchman Fellowship and the organizations like that have been around doing this for a long time. They don't even know we exist. Why is that?
I don't know, but I do know that technology is bringing us the opportunity to join together. And we may have some Ratio Christi friends. Maybe you want to give them a short briefer about what Midwest Christian Outreach is before I go into mine.
Sure. Midwest Christian Outreach. Actually, I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach and Evangelical Ministers to New Religions. So I wear 2 hats often. But Midwest Christian Outreach started out as a mission to Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what it originally was back in the early 1990s. But we started getting phone calls on so many groups, including false teachers in the church, that we have become more of a general mission to cults and non-Christian religions and addressing serious error within the church. We don't address all error within a church, but serious error. Someone who denies the physicality of the resurrection, for example, as we had at Trinity Seminary some years back. Those kinds of things. And also Evangelical Ministries to New Religions, which is a consortium or a coalition of ministries to cults and non-Christian religions from kind of around the country. We all band together. In fact, we have a conference coming up at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary at the end of April. So that's happening. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and then I think we had talked on about a common touch point, the National Conference on Christian Apologetics out of Southern Evangelical Seminary. And of course, you've been personal friends of Norm Geisler for many years.
Yes, we met, actually, Norm and I met in 1991. And at that time, there was a big problem with one of the professors, as I pointed out, at Trinity at that point, who taught in a particular book that he believed in the bodily resurrection of Christ, but it wasn't physical. And he essentially was teaching Jehovah's Witness doctrine at the seminary level on the resurrection. This was a serious problem. So that's how we met. At the Cornerstone Festival, I was asked to go down and give him. In fact, kind of the story goes, I had a call from a mutual friend. I hadn't met Dr. Geisler at that point. But a friend called me and said, Dr. Geisler is going to be at Cornerstone Festival, which was a big festival put on by Jesus People USA in Southern Illinois at the time, which I kind of described as a kind of like a Christian Woodstock and a flea market. And they had some of the best apologetics teachers in the world there, though, at that time. And so Geisler was going to be there. And they asked me if I would go on and help him to deal with this issue, because they needed to be able to explain it to pastors why this was a problem. And my first reaction was, camping with 25,000 of my closest friends is not my idea of a good time. So I'd love to meet Norm, but I don't really want to be there. And so I got a call back a few days later and said, would you reconsider? We really need you to be there. And I said, like I said, camping with 25,000 of my closest friends is not just my idea of a good time. And so then they called back a few days later and I said, okay, Dr. Geisler said he'll share his hotel room with you if you'll go. And so that's how we met. That's how we met.
That's the way to meet people. I guess I hadn't heard that story, so that's a great story.
Oh, it was great. In fact, I had been there all day, and I have all these pastors coming through, and they're starting to debate with me. How do you know the resurrection was physical? And I said, well, have you read the Bible? And we're doing that. And about 6 o'clock at night, in the evening, this guy comes around the corner in a T-shirt, ice cream cone in each hand, says, "Hi, I'm Norm. Having ice cream," and that's how we made our first introduction.
That's great. So, Ratio Christi was born out of Southern Evangelical Seminary, and the first club was at Appalachian State. And so a lot of the people who got involved early on, as far as their doctrinal orientation, are very much along the lines of Southern Evangelical Seminary. In fact, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to show some of the slides from the deck. And we're not going to read every slide. This is kind of a generic deck, but then I wanted to quickly go to the website, and then we'll talk about the doctrinal statement. We'll start there first, because this is an apologetics presentation, so you'll have a chance to see that and what the goals of the organization are. And then I'll focus on what I'm doing now in the states of Georgia and Florida right now for Ratio Christi, and kind of how I got there. So we'll just kind of have 3 points.
You're a regional director. People need to know that. You're a regional director for Ratio Christi.
Yes.
Okay.
Regional director for Ratio Christi. So I think that does show on my little tagline down there. But that is my current role. And right now, I volunteer in a variety of church or ministry related things. Right now, this is the single most important role that I'm involved in right now. So I consider it really important what the impact could be, and also just so glad to be partnered up with really dozens of people who are like-minded and who are wanting to have a vibrant community that's active in not just promoting things that we know about apologetics, but also engaging any cultural issues that come up. And the university is an excellent forum to have those discussions. So let me switch to the slide deck. And again, I'm only going to show certain slides. Hopefully, Don, you can tell me if that's showing.
It is.
It is. Okay. So the focus right now and the energy for Ratio Christi is the college campuses and the college clubs. It's not the only thing that's happening at Ratio Christi. There's some other efforts for high school students and then also for faculty. So, and I'm not going to go into the other branches, but the main focus is for the on-campus apologetics clubs. So let me go forward here in the deck. So the problem is that although many of our leading universities were founded to train pastors and missionaries, and they're talking about specifically in the United States, on the sciences now, it's assumed that God never intervenes, existed at all. In humanities, often the historicity and relevance of Jesus and the Bible are trampled and marginalized. And it's just a narrative now that's being taken in how people present Christianity. And, you know, it's even worse for science. And a lot of science teaching is that Christianity is at odds with science. And I don't personally believe. I think there's a case for why science came as a large result from the Christian worldview. Anyway, these ideas do need to be discussed. We have many now who are publishing in the public press and making their views known, not just in books now. A lot of these authors now are involved in debates. Some of them have debated Christians, and a lot of their ideas are found on YouTube, and, you know, you can find lectures or seminars that they may give. And you know what? A lot of them also will present at universities. For example, Richard Dawkins there, who's on the left side, came to Georgia, and he presented at one of the same campuses where we have a Ratio Christi club, which is Kennesaw State University. So he came there, he charged admission for his events, and later on the club hosted William Lane Craig, largely to respond to claims Dawkins made, you know, previously in his own presentation. So I think that we see that a lot of these prominent voices see the value of the campus as a vehicle to get their message out. Now, one of the other issues that we're seeing is that many of the professing born-again students lose their faith in college. I have a number here. It says 51 to 80%. I don't know that the number's that high. I've seen various numbers that range anywhere from 20% to 80%. So, you know, I think it really depends on, you know, where they are, what school they are, and, you know, what do you mean by losing their faith? It could just mean that they were exposed to Christianity. Maybe they weren't a Christian before they went to college. So it is in the details. And nevertheless, I think we do realize that the university is a time when many young people are hearing challenges to their faith that they may have grown up with. All right, so one of the key findings in people studying this phenomena is that students leave faith primarily because of intellectual skepticism and doubt. And I have a slightly different take based on my own experience. I think my belief is that when students go to, and now I'm going to tell you how I'm basing this, not just my work with Ratio Christi. I personally have a doctorate from Georgia Tech. I've taught at Georgia Tech and University of Phoenix. I've mentored graduate level research for University of Phoenix, and I've also developed coursework for Brunel University. So I've had some exposure to the university world, even though it's not been a full-time profession for me. But my opinion is that I feel that a lot of students are challenged in other topics in the way that they were not challenged in Bible or their faith. And when I think of my experience in mentoring doctoral research, I mean, when somebody prepares to write a dissertation, they may be criticized line by line, sentence by sentence, for what they are saying as are their main claims in their research, and to be able to defend it. So they have to defend their work, you know, in the case of a researcher. And it is a new experience. And again, for students going to college, they may not have had to defend their faith in the same way. Many of them want to learn how to do that. And of course, the reason I feel that Ratio Christi is successful to date is because we see many students attracted to the apologetics framework, which looks very similar, you know, to the type of framework they use to examine other questions in their academic disciplines. So I
Now,
think
I have a question. I need to kind of interact here for a second,
sure.
because the statistics are large, and they probably are accurate. I know there's some doubt by some on that score, but I have to point out that some years ago I had a professor of philosophy. He and I were having lunch, and he said, I don't want you to say what institution this is, but I am finding that my first year philosophy students, I have to start with them and teach them that there is such a thing as absolute truth. I've never had to do that before. This is new for me, he said, because they're not learning that in their churches. So I'm starting from ground zero on just basic understandings of truth and how we access truth.
Mm-hmm.
So having said that, now we're 2 decades later, and we're looking at pretty similar statistics about going to college and losing one's faith. I have to go back and say, shouldn't the church be doing a better job through grade school, junior high school, and perhaps high school in teaching the kids not just what the faith is, but how to think, how to ask questions, how to use reason and logic? Because it seems to me that's just not. I mean, they're good at playing dodgeball, maybe, but not at those kinds of things.
Right, and I think there's a particular book that I recommend to my doctoral students. It's called The Rule Book for Arguments, and it's not a Christian book. It's just a general logic book. I think that type of book is something I would build a course around, even for high school students, how to argue on Facebook.
Oh, now there's a class.
There is a class, because, here's the thing. If they're already engaged on social media and they're having to present arguments, it is important to have that toolbox. You're still trying to figure out maybe where you land on certain topics, but there is a formal methodology, as is taught in philosophy classes, that now young people are maybe having to learn a bit quicker because they now have an audience. They have something didn't exist when I was in high school. The only audience I had were classes I were in, and maybe I had an oral presentation. But today, young people have an audience on social media that it's an opportunity, and if they're participating, why not be ready?
Now, what was the name of that book again?
It's a rule book for arguments, and I'm pretty sure that's correct. And let me look it up to make sure that I am correct.
Okay.
Rule book for
how to argue on Facebook. That is, I like that concept. That's an interesting idea. We did, we haven't done this in a while, but I was some years ago asked to teach a Bible study for 6 weeks on Jehovah's Witnesses, how to talk to a Jehovah's Witness.
Right.
And that ended up being 6 years. We ended up doing it for 6 years, not on one group. Because what we do is we go through an issue, say the resurrection, for example. Here's what the Watchtower teaches on that. And then role play. I would be a Jehovah's Witness, and the rest of the group would have to be the Christians trying to persuade me. And then it's fun being the Jehovah's Witness because I can make up anything. Like Jehovah's Witnesses do.
Oh, you're being facetious right there. Don't you have to be told what your narrative is, though, if you're Jehovah's Witness? Isn't that small council?
You do. They have the reasoning from
Bible
scriptures.
translation.
Yeah, they have a narrative, but if it's something outside of the narrative, they will make things up sometimes. I had one. I was talking about Christ on the throne, the Father on the throne. And they looked at me nonplussed, and they said, well, I think the throne's like a really big couch, and there's a lot of people sitting on it. Now, that's not Watchtower, but it was inventive.
Wow.
So this book is what?
Yeah, so it is Rule Book for Arguments. And Anthony Weston is the author. And in the doctoral students I have worked with, I want them to read this before we start working together over what may be a 3-year relationship, not full-time, but part-time. And, look at who I'm aiming this at. This is like graduate students. But this is now, you must know how to do this because this is what you need to finish your dissertation. Otherwise, we end up having a lot of conversations that stray, and a lot of them has to do with how they are presenting their arguments. So it's not, let me clarify. Again, we're talking to general Christian audience, maybe in this podcast. Sometimes they hear the word argument and they think argumentative. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about an emotion. We're talking about presenting your case. That's what this is about.
Right. A reasoned presentation of what you believe about.
A reasoned, rational, emotionally under control case. That's what we're talking about. Right.
Okay. And that's really important, especially in today's culture. I mean, we have a culture here that's not even certain that there's only two genders.
Wow.
Right? I think Facebook has something like 72 possibilities you can choose from.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and we just had a college student yesterday, I believe, was kicked out of class because he insisted there were only two genders, and it's an introduction to religion class or something like that in a area college. So
right. So I think the point you're bringing up is important. You know, as these topics come up, I mean, how many have we seen happen just say in the last 7 years? As these new discussions come up, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, they are field tested at the university.
Right. They are field tested. That's you almost feel like, okay, if we had an army in the United States, which we do, and we sort of trained them like many of the churches are training their students that are going to be going to college. In other words, have them do dodgeball and that kind of stuff, and then send them off to battle. How would we fare? I don't think we would fare well.
Yeah. So we are trying to equip for that purpose. So let me go forward in these slides, and I know we're coming up to the half hour, so we're going to want to go to Ron's promotional if he's ready for that for later.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm trying to recover from some kind of bad thing that happened to my computer. So
okay,
we'll see.
We think his computer had the flu or some other virus.
Okay, so let me go forward to what we are trying to do as far as vision. Here's the vision. So Ratio Christi clubs are changing the game on campus by first examining the truth of Christianity. And that's the structure is to have a chapter director, hopefully someone who can spend physical time on campus. Sometimes we have someone who's a faculty or staff member as that chapter director, and then maybe also a faculty advisor. And so that person that we would want for a chapter director is going to be trained in apologetics and will sign up for the statement of faith that we have for Ratio Christi. So it'll be someone who is not a student to be a chapter director. Could be a graduate from the school or just anyone. And then key also to have these clubs is someone who's an active student or group of students who now want to be the officers for this club. And that would allow them to become a registered organization and may have access to facilities. And in the case, for example, of Kennesaw State University, they also have access to funds that allow them to pay for events, such as we recently hosted a debate on the Kennesaw State University campus. But access to those funds certainly requires to have students who want to be running these. Mm-hmm. So we'll have a number of things here. And, you know, one thing that's true at Kennesaw, and I know many campuses, they do try to befriend maybe some of the people who claim to be atheists or free thinkers and invite them to meetings. And a lot of times some of them will attend regularly, and just know that when they do go, that they are going to get a hearing on what their viewpoint is. So this is not, you know, we're not thinking about this as a Christian discipling class in that sense. It is more of an environment where we can have apologetics topics brought and then open discussion from the students and have them engage on where they are in terms of what they think about these topics.
That is really important. I don't know if you're aware of this, but my friend James Walker, he's president of Watchman Fellowship out of Arlington, Texas. Maybe a year ago, started an atheist and Christian book club. He had been meeting with a group of area atheists on a monthly basis. He was attending their meetings, and they allowed him to come in, and they decided that they kind of liked him. He was an unusual Christian to them, and he wasn't obviously he wasn't mean-spirited, but engaging. And so they started this atheist and Christian book club, and 1 month they'll read a book by a Christian. Next month it'll be by an atheist, and they get together and do some good discussion and dialogue about the topic. So they're discovering, the non-Christians are discovering that Christians can be friends with them, which sounds to me what you're advocating for, is to say,
Correct.
yes, we need a reasoned discussion, a reasoned argument as to why we believe what we believe, but we need to do it in a sort of a friendly environment where an atheist, for example, could feel comfortable being there.
Right. And, even the recent debate we had, our atheist guest, I guess he's calling himself an atheist now, is Bart Ehrman, well known as, as an atheist or a skeptic, and certainly knew the Christian
agnostic. I don't know that he's ever called himself an atheist, but he's very clear that he's agnostic. Yeah.
Okay. So I heard different things, but the point is that he came to the debate because he felt like he could get his message stated. And there were a number of people who are sympathetic to his viewpoint, also who came to that event. And while they came, they also heard, in an evangelical approach. So it's just, the idea here is allowing Christianity to be presented in the civil forum, in the civil discourse. That's where we are right now. We're even fighting for that. And by the way, I'm gonna bring up that we do have a partnership that we sometimes use. Unfortunately, we are partnered with Alliance Defending Freedom. They are a legal organization. And just to let people know, some people may have heard of the ACLU. Well, ACLU is not Alliance Defending Freedom. In fact, they, as the ADF people say, they are almost always on the other side of every legal topic of ACLU. And if they are on the same side, they have to take a double check. They have to make sure that, wait a minute, why are we on the same side?
Right.
But
I was accidentally on the same side as they were once. It was scary. And now we're gonna have a word from Ron, by the way.
Oh, let's go to Ron.
Well, I apologize for my technical difficulties. I apologize on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation, which caused them. At least I'm blaming them. I'm not saying it's their fault. I'm just saying I'm blaming them. Our first sponsor for this afternoon is our friends at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other notions whose time has gone and is still trying to figure out how to clean up in the ministry business. Do you want to finally learn how to get to the bottom of growing a successful church? Would you like to flush away your failures and start having your best church now? Well, then you need Charlatan Ultra Soft, because nothing says theologically soft like Joel Osteen's Charlatan Ultra Soft. It's personally tested by the man himself. It provides comfort where it counts. It wipes away even the most stubborn orthodoxy. It comes with a money-back guarantee. Yes, Charlatan Ultra Soft. Keep those butts in the pews with Charlatan Ultra Soft, available at World's End Theology Outlet. So get yourself a 12-pack or 24-pack today.
All right. So,
all right. So let's, right now, I'm going to do a little bit of history, and then we'll jump into the doctrinal statement. So this was started by students at Appalachia State College 2007, and partly in response to the New Atheist movement. They actually started as a reasonable faith club. That would be William Lane Craig's organization, but then they decided to make their own thing and became Ratio Christi, and was nurtured along by Southern Evangelical Seminary until it became its own organization, now serving at 160 campuses in the U.S. and abroad. And those campuses would be listed on the website. It is a 501c3. The intention long-term is going to be having people who have apologetics training, and especially at the graduate level, so we're talking about masters and doctorates, taking the roles of these chapter directors, and even the role I have now as a regional director, and raising support and doing that full time, as many people do for campus ministries. Ratio Christi's partnered with a organization called SRS, which is Steve Shadrach, and I have there's one man in my region who has been a church pastor, and he's wanting to raise support. And I told him that the challenge here for Steve Shadrach's training is to raise 100% of your support in 100 days. And that's the goal. And that does require prep, but that is going to be the direction to go. Right now, to my knowledge, most of the chapter directors and people doing my role are bivocational, or they really have a full-time job somewhere else. And it's really only a very few people that are on support, but the idea is for them to go on to support as we go forward.
Yeah, and it probably would be easier to raise support for campus ministry, unlike Midwest Christian Outreach. We kind of are viewed as the ugly redheaded stepchild of the church because we deal with cults and false religious movements primarily. And we also deal with false teaching within the church. And so it makes people a little skittish about supporting what it is that we do.
Mm-hmm.
But campus ministry, they would view that as more evangelistic in orientation. And so it's probably going to be easier.
Yeah. So we've had a number of prominent leaders who've known about Ratio Christi and lent their endorsement toward it. Josh McDowell's one. We also had... we've had a number of speakers who've come to our annual fundraising, which is done in conjunction with the National Conference in Christian Apologetics. So in fact, that conference that happens in October is a good way to meet a lot of people from Ratio Christi, or even go to the banquet. We've had speakers like John Lennox came one year, gave some, an excellent talk on his work, and just different ones over time. Now I'd actually like to stop this, and let's go to the, I'm going to drag over the screen, hopefully that shows. It's going to jump straight into the About Us page and go right into the belief statement. So there's a belief statement that we have here. And I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to touch on parts of it just to give people an idea of where Ratio Christi is coming from. First of all, and I didn't show the slide on this, so let me just make a comment. There are so many Christian ministries out there, and the goal of Ratio Christi is not to draw people from their campus ministry. We want people to continue their other campus ministry, and we see ourselves as an addition or help to other ministries. And to be able to establish that, that relationship, some of our campus directors, need to meet with the other Christian leaders that are trying to do their other ministries and see what areas can we collaborate. Can we help them with a ministry project? Can we help them with an outreach event? Can we co-sponsor something for pro-life? So we're looking for areas of collaboration. We're not trying to compete with any specific Christian ministry and for all our campuses. And then in our doctrinal statement here, as we have the preamble here, accepts a large areas of agreement on doctrinal teaching, consider the historic Christian faith as expressed in the numerous creeds. So the creeds are important. Down in the scripture, it says the 66 books of the Old and New Testament scripture alone to be inspired in all its very words by God and inerrant in the text of the original manuscripts, and they alone are of supreme and final authority in faith and life. So there's a statement there of inerrancy and infallibility. And then there's also, a justification of the Trinity and other statements here about Jesus Christ, salvation, Holy Spirit, and other topics. And for people to decide they want to become part of the formal organization, do need to sign on to this statement of faith. Let me pause right there.
Okay. So you're going to pause right there. I'm going to ask you a question because we just, Ron, Joy and I and Ron have been contributing now to something called the Christian Post. And this week I wrote on the question of misunderstandings on the Trinity through the use of bad language, let's say. They had done an article about 5 years ago on a statement on the Trinity that was signed by some 60 or 70 professors, and it's a pretty solid statement. But in the article, the journalist used the word manifestations regarding the Trinity. What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with the word manifestations? So is that referring to a natural manifestation?
No. It's referring to the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are each manifestations.
Manifestations of the Godhead.
Oh. No, they're three persons.
I think it also used the word, didn't it also use the word aspects at one point?
Yes. Another place to use the word aspects. And both would be, from an Orthodox position, would be heretical, actually. So,
right.
Maybe what? Excuse me?
Heretical.
It has to be heretical because how could Jesus Christ die if he was an aspect? Who resurrected him?
Well, I would say we have to be careful here, because the phrase, my quarrel with the words manifestation and aspect is that they're too ambiguous, that they're not specific enough. What kind of aspect? What kind of manifestation? The Sabellians or the modalists, they would agree that Jesus is God,
right?
But they deny that he is in any way a separate person from the Father or the Spirit. In other words, a modalist would say you have one God, one person, three manifestations, three aspects. Okay, so they're using the word manifestation or aspect to say something very specific. And frankly, whenever you encounter those two words, those are red flags. Those are, red flags that we might be dealing with a Sabellian. But as we read further down into that article, I think it became pretty clear that the writer was not a Sabellian or a modalist. They simply made a very poor choice of words.
Right.
So in their mind, they could talk about manifestation or aspect and still think of separate persons. But that's just not the way the language has been historically used. The English words allow for that, but no, you're really on thin ice, and you really need to avoid those words because their most common interpretation is Sabellian or modalist.
Right. Right. So why did I ask that question? Well, as you're going through your doctrinal statement, and as you point out, you have a number of denominations on campus, and you're not encouraging anyone to leave any particular groups, but sort of to add this apologetics aspect. And the Trinity is one of the areas where most Christians are borderline heretics, if not all out heretics, not because they overtly reject the doctrine of the Trinity, but because they don't understand it and they misdefine it, or, as in the case of manifestations, use ambiguous language. How do you safeguard on something like that?
Yeah, and that's important. I haven't personally been involved in a Trinity discussion at Ratio Christi. I will bring up one that did happen in my local church, and we have these monthly meetings, and right now we're going through the Trinity. So we had a recording lecture on the Trinity, and then we had some very basic questions about what the Trinity was. And just in our just conversational group, I would agree that what you're saying is true. And, I think a lot of people don't understand what the difference is or what's at stake. But let me, Don, pull on a theme that we've seen in previous podcasts. A lot of the organizations that we identify as cults are so because they are wrong on the Trinity. And a lot of them are wrong on denying the divinity of Jesus Christ. But as I had shared in my experience with Worldwide Church of God, we had a divine statement for God and Jesus Christ, but not the Holy Spirit. And even at that, I think it was even incomplete, understanding what, it led people to beliefs like binitarian. They said they were binitarian. It's like, okay, or they couldn't explain how God was one, and yet there was a Father and a Son. And they never got into the scholarship on this topic. So I do agree that it is something that is an important topic. Let me pause there.
Okay.
Yeah. I will say a lot of the questions, just in my experience in the college campuses, a lot of them are asking questions that are, ones that are similar to the ones we talked about earlier, even pro-life or anything related to how to understand our culture or how to even live out your Christian faith and, be on the Christian campus. And one of the statements here we say is a primary area of focus will remain on the defense of the foundations of truth in Christianity as opposed to secularism and naturalism. So the question is, where are people getting their truth? That is a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it from naturalism? Is it from secular? How are we resolving society's questions that we may have at the voting booth or, things that come up in the news? Is one of the recurring touch points for a lot of students right now.
So on a college campus today, I mean, we have watched sometimes in abject horror as we see some of the major campuses call for safe spaces,
right,
where students can go and not have to have their ideas challenged or even consider that there might be an idea contrary to something they want to believe.
Right.
How are you finding that working on the campuses you're on? And you might take your PowerPoint down for a second while you talk.
Right. I will do that. And in fact, I'm going to tell a story at this point. I earlier mentioned, and hopefully you see me on the screen. I earlier mentioned that we have a partnership with ADF. And, the safe space topic is not just a commentary there, but, at the publicly supported universities, the safe space idea is not legal. That's the general legal. And I'm not a lawyer. Okay, so let me qualify getting into this discussion. ADF right now recently filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Ratio Christi Club at Kennesaw State over safe spaces. And what happened most recently in October 2017, the club there held a pro-life exhibit, and they had a reserved space where they were going to share their materials. The campus officials came and they talked to them and apparently didn't like what they were doing, so they sent them to the safe space area. Well, this was just one of many things that happened, and I'm not going to represent facts in the case because I'm not involved personally. The whole statement and the complaint is available through the ADF website. But right now, ADF has sued Kennesaw State, with the claims that this is not a legal practice. So that's how it had been reported in the media. So I would point people to the public media as the authoritative source for that topic. But in general, stepping aside from that particular legal case, the opportunity for Ratio Christi really is at the public schools. Now, private schools are not obligated to have clubs at all. I mean, they don't have to do it, and that's what we would expect to be true. For example, if there were a private Christian university, they're not obligated to club available in the world. They can control that. But at the public schools, there is the opportunity to have these Christian groups, and those are the places where we think that, at least my personal beliefs, I think that the large public supported universities are going to be a great place to focus on as far as establishing these clubs.
By the way, I just need to raise this because we've had a couple of comments. Daniel Moore writes, Trinity, one what, three whos. That's correct. And then he also says that in my experience, modalism is less of a problem than Pelagianism. Now, for the average person, Ron, what is Pelagianism?
It's essentially the denial of the doctrine of original sin. In other words, that we are born in sin, that we inherit a sin nature as well as the guilt of sin from our parents, Adam and Eve. By the guilt of sin, I mean the cause of our physical death, as Paul explains in Romans 4, is that we are related to Adam. So we're counted for the purposes of our physical death, not our spiritual death, but our physical death. We're born in Adam, and that's imputed to us. For our spiritual death is also inherited by the virtue of the fact that we have a sin nature. So Pelagianism was a heresy in the early 5th century, but I don't know if I would agree that Pelagianism is a bigger problem, because every single denomination, mainstream, every single historic Christian denomination denies Pelagianism, yes, including the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. Whereas I think modalism it's kind of it's brought about in the church because of just a lack of clear teaching on the Trinity. I'm sure you could say the same about when you see outbreaks of Pelagianism, but I don't know that it's as common as modalism. I don't know. I think most Christians understand that they're born sinners.
Yeah.
Well, one of the aspects that may touch on that actually is a science question. Was there a historic Adam and Eve? And in the statement for Ratio Christi, we're saying we believe in the historicity of the biblical record, including the special creation of Adam and Eve, the first human and male, female, as the literal progenitors of all people. So if somebody steps off of that and tries to make an argument of original sin without a historical Adam and Eve, that's a different perspective.
It is most likely that you'll have difficulty establishing original sin if you deny the historicity of Adam and Eve. I don't see how. I don't know how you can do it, frankly, and I don't know anyone who's ever tried. And of course, a lot of Christians assume that evolution is true. So, or professing Christians, I should say. I usually find the denial of original sin tied to a doctrine of salvation by works. And I have a hard time, we're not talking about evangelicals anymore, even pretend evangelicals, and
faux evangelicals.
And so many churches, the church is doing a very poor job in so many areas today, including teaching on the doctrine of sin. But I think so far in our culture, in our Christian culture, it's been so embedded. Now this could be eroding away even as I speak. and maybe it's eroded more than I realized, but I think most people who are born in a
All right, we're kind of losing Ron here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
We got
you're
you.
back now. You're kind of breaking up a little.
I saw myself freeze on my own screen, so I thought that's a problem.
Yeah, it is, especially since you're in Florida.
Yeah, it's freezing. So most Christians most Christians I talk to, no matter what their denominational background, seem to understand, yes, we're born sinners. Everybody's a sinner. Now,
well, you would think so, but Daniel Moore makes an interesting point, and I think this kind of bears on our discussion with Ratio Christi. He says to ask any college student, apart from the Holy Spirit, can a person do anything that is pleasing to God? Also, most students think the nature of mankind is essentially good. Now, Joy and I have written on this a lot, and one of the things that we tend to point out is the difference between progressives and conservatives. Progressives' worldview starts with the idea that man is basically good, and they pass laws to protect the basically good individual from what they see as the corrupt culture.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas conservatives see man as basically not good, and so they pass laws to protect culture from the not good individual. So maybe this is where this Pelagianism sort of question comes into play. And I think, as you pointed out, without a literal Adam and Eve, how do you deal with the whole question of where sin or evil originated? So how do you, as a ministry on campus dealing with a reasonable faith, reasoned Christ, how do you deal with that with unbelievers that are coming in and tackle this question of the origin of sin?
Yeah. I'm only going to speak to my personal experience. I don't know that I make a case for original sin necessarily as part of an evangelistic presentation. I would focus on that person and see if they are personally convicted of sin. If they are personally convicted of sin, yes, that could, be a path to understanding original sin. But just to see Jesus Christ as the answer is to me an important part of the equation. Now, that being said, as we know, in Romans, Paul makes the argument about contrasting the first Adam and the second Adam. So if you want to read the call to Jesus from Romans, it does walk through the importance of Adam as being part of that story. And, I wouldn't dodge it. I mean, I believe, Romans' road to salvation is reading Romans 1 through 10, and then ending up with, how shall they hear the word? You need a preacher to be able to explain, what this message is, more than just the general revelation early in Revelation. You need the special revelation of Jesus Christ and what did he do for you? Going back to Ratio Christi, what is the reason? He's always the answer. So, we have.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I was typing. I've had several comments, and I thought I better address some of them.
Okay, yeah, let's do. Yeah.
No, someone was just commenting that mankind is naturally good. Might as well worship Oprah. And I said, well, she is something of a priestess these days. She's done a lot in terms of religious recruiting with her various programs and things, mostly into the new age.
Right. She's in a new movie, too, as I learned. I was watching television last night, a commercial about her new movie, and she has that kind of a priestess role in the movie.
She kind of does. Now, our friend Marcia Montenegro had written a little bit about the author of the original book, which many think is a Christian book. Unfortunately, it really isn't a Christian book, although it has some sort of, quotes Bible passages and has a Jesus Christ of sorts and that sort of thing. At least uses the name in there. All of that was exercised from the movie. So... we're not even really sure I haven't seen the movie, so I can't.
It's supposed to come out, and movie's always different from the book.
Yeah.
Well, but before we end, I do want to end up with some things that people can do if they're interested in Ratio Christi in their area. They can find the information on the website and contact me directly. The meetings we have are open to the public. So if there's a campus close to you and they have a topic of your interest, and you don't have to be a college student, you find out about them. A lot of the clubs have Facebook pages where they publish their events. Some of the events are debates, and some of them are large. I mean, we recently hosted the one I mentioned. There was another one with William Lane Craig, and you're free to attend those. For those in the apologetics community, if you're in apologetics ministry, we're also always looking for speakers, presenters to go to campuses and share their message and wisdom. And that would happen, by talking with the chapter director and seeing what might be possible in your geographic area.
Oh, that would be great. And, we're kind of getting close to the end here. So if people wanted to contact you, how would they do that?
So they can contact me. I will verbally give my email, because then I don't think I'll get spam from this. But marktab@ratiochristi.org would be my email, or they can find me on Facebook, and be happy to talk to people about what Ratio Christi is doing and how they might want to get involved.
Are you known as Mark Tab on Facebook?
On Facebook, I am Mark Tabladillo, I'm sorry, my tagline here just has Mark Tab, but I think if you look up Mark Tab, you probably would find me. I'm not going to do it right now, but
okay. Well,
and if you don't know, send an email to Don.
Mark Tabladillo, and in fact, I have your name on the promotion for this webcast, so they can pick it up from there and look you up that way.
Okay.
And with that, we're going to ask Ron to, by the way, for those who are listening, next week, we're going to have Dr. Norman Geisler on the question of how did we get our Bible? So that'll be next Tuesday. Ron, you want to walk us out of here?
Sure thing. Okay. Well, our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just in Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Mormon Archives Manager, Polygamus. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben-Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. Our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, who are solely responsible for this content, but you'll never, ever, ever prove it in a court of law.
Never, ever,
That's
ever.
why we have those lawyers.
All right, Mark, we will have you back again in the future. And Ron, we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.